Gaines now brings you something to think about.
Shalom and greetings. Thank you for tuning in to Something to Think About. I'm his servant, Jeff Gaines, and this episode of Something to Think About is entitled Counting the Cost of Serving Yawh Elohiym. Let us start off with something to think about. How many of us believers were asked to consider counting the costs before we made a commitment to become a believer? Or was your call to serve Yawh Elohiym a sales pitch of all the benefits you would receive? Were you presented with the costs and the benefits of serving Yawh Elohiym so that you would make a well-informed decision? Were you ever informed that you cannot serve Yawh Elohiym in the way that you see fit? That there are certain expectations, costs in truly serving Yawh Elohiym? Unfortunately, to the detriment of those seeking to be followers or disciples of Yeshua, counting the cost of serving Yawh Elohiym is not a commonplace issue that converts or even long-term believers, for that matter, are apt to consider. During this episode, we want to examine counting the cost of serving Yawh Elohiym, whether we are long-standing believers, new believers, or still considering whether or not to become a believer. As we always do, let us move from just knowing to truly understanding what we are discussing. We are discussing counting the cost. So, what does this mean? Well, the Collins English Dictionary defines it as, if someone counts the cost of something that has happened or will happen, they consider how the consequences of that action or event affect them. This definition, for the purpose of what we will be examining, is the most complete. Other definitions, including the Merriam-Webster's Dictionary's definition, only addresses counting the cost after an action or event. But we will show, and Scripture will endorse it, it would behoove anyone to count the cost before they embark upon a thing. Let's take the portion of the definition used in the Collins English Dictionary of considering the consequences of an action or an event a little deeper. It can be construed or interpreted that the act of considering would include both the act of choosing to do or not to do. Following this line of thinking shows why we chose the Collins English Dictionary definition over the others. Because the others did not include counting the cost before. As we continue this train of thought, something to think about. It implies when a person counts the cost, they have assumed some responsibility for their outcome. So, when counting the cost to do or not to do, it is understood that not to do anything still may have consequences. This is important to bring out because sadly, some people believe if they do nothing, it should absolve them from consequences of a bad outcome. Again, another example of why we chose the Collins English Dictionary definition. It is of paramount importance that we count the costs, consider consequences before we embark upon anything, especially serving Yawh Elohiym. Informed with the insight we now have on what counting the costs means, let us examine what we are considering. We are considering serving Yawh Elohiym. So, let us grow from just knowing to understanding what is serving or to serve. The Merriam-Webster's Dictionary has as some of its definitions to comply with the commands or demands of, to perform the duties of, as in an office or post. Now, interestingly, both of these definitions require someone serving to have knowledge of who or what they are serving is expecting of them. By inference, to comply with commands or demands, you must first understand what the commands or demands are. To perform duties in an office or post, you must first understand what your responsibilities are. In order to comply with the commands or demands of whom you are serving, you must first get the commands or demands from the one you are serving. In the Merriam-Webster's dictionary definitions of serve, the military is referenced. Now, when serving in the military, everyone is told exactly what they are to do and are expected to follow it to the letter. There is no place for free thinking in the military. Everyone is to be on the same page, and the page is whatever page they give you. So, let us apply what we've learned thus far about counting the cost of serving Yahweh Elohim. What are the consequences of making this decision without counting the cost? We now understand that counting the cost means to consider the consequences, both of doing or not doing, before embarking upon anything. We also move from just knowing to understanding serving or to serve. That in order to serve, one must comply with the commands or demands given to them by the one they are serving without exception. When we put counting the cost and serving together, it means considering the consequences of both to do or not to do before embarking upon complying with the commands and or demands given by the one being served without exception. Let us now focus in on what the scripture has to say about counting the cost of serving Yahweh Elohim. It is actually in alignment with the secular definition that was given in the Collins English Dictionary. Yeshua shares this in the Gospel of Luke. Remember, in the Collins English Dictionary, in its definition, it mentioned they consider. So, let us examine the word consider as it is used in the scripture. The word consider is used 67 times in 66 verses in the King James scripture and has several different definitions. The definition that best defines counting the cost is the Hebrew word bean, and is defined to separate mentally or distinguish, i.e., generally understand, attend, consider. It is first used in this manner in the scripture in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 32, verse 7 and verse 29. This is in the song given by Moses. In both of these verses, the children of Israel are asked to consider or think about what had transpired and the consequences if they did nothing to change. In Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 5 and 6, Yahweh Elohim is telling of how the children of Israel had become corrupt, perverse, crooked, foolish, and unwise. Let us read Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 5. It reads, "They have corrupted themselves. Their spot is not the spot of his children. They are a perverse and crooked generation." Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 6. "Do ye thus requite the Lord, O foolish people and unwise? Is not he thy father that hath bought thee? Hath he not made thee and established thee? Now the word requite used here means to repay. Yahweh Elohim is asking them, is this how they repay him for what he has done? Let us now pick up in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 7. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask thy father, and he will show thee. Thy elders, and they will tell thee. Here, Scripture is sharing that the children of Israel can easily distinguish their actions and deeds by simply asking their fathers and their fathers' fathers or elders how they had turned away from Yahweh Elohim. But before Yahweh Elohim will disclose their consequence, he shares with them in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 18 through 14, how he watched over Israel and gave them abundance. Let us read Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 8. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 9. For the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. He found him in a desert land and in the waste howling wilderness. He led him about. He instructed him. He kept him as the apple of his eye. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 11. As an eagle stirreth up her nest, fluttereth over her young, spreadeth abroad her wings, taketh them, beareth them on her wings. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 12. So the Lord alone did lead him, and there was no strange God with him. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 13. He made him ride on the high places of the earth, that he might eat the increase of the fields. And he made him to suck honey out of the rock, and oil out of the flinty rock. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 14. Butter of kine and milk of sheep, with fat of lambs and rams of the breed of Bashan, and goats with the fat of kidneys of wheat. And thou didst drink the pure blood of the grape. Then in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 15 through 28, Yahweh Elohim tells of how Israel became greedy, forgetting about the Most High, and that this drove Yahweh Elohim to jealousy and anger against Israel to bring them to their demise. It is of paramount importance that we understand that Yahweh Elohim is always driven or provoked to judge or punish his creation. Let us pick up in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 29. Oh, that they were wise, that they understood this, that they would consider their latter end. Scripture continues to validate the scriptural meaning of the word consider. Yahweh Elohim is lamenting that Israel did not mentally distinguish their actions and how they could not see their latter end. The word consider in the New Testament / covenant also has different meanings. The one most adequately defining counting the cost is the Greek word katan. It is used in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 12, verse 24 and verse 27. Its meaning is similar to the Old Testament / covenant definition. To perceive clearly, to understand fully. Let us read the Gospel of Luke chapter 12, verse 24. Consider the ravens, for they neither sow nor reap, which neither have storehouse nor barn, and God feedeth them, how much more are ye better than the fowls? The Gospel of Luke chapter 12 verse 27. Consider the lilies, how they grow. They toil not, they spin not. And yet I say unto you, that Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Yeshua is speaking unto his disciples to consider, perceive clearly, and understand what he was sharing with them. That Yahweh Elohim is faithful. So there is no reason for his believers not to be faithful and serve him by complying to his commandments. The scripture definitively speaks to us in regards to considering or thinking about to do or not to do the commandments, statutes, laws, instructions, and ordinances of Yahweh Elohim. Let us now go to the scripture that directly addresses believers counting the cost of serving Yahweh Elohim. Let us go to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 14, and we'll read verses 25 through 35. The Gospel of Luke, chapter 14, verse 25 reads, And there went great multitudes with him, and he turned and said unto them. Now here, the very first verse shares with us that Yeshua is speaking to a multitude of people. The Gospel of Luke chapter 14 verse 26. If any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Here, the Messiah gives a commandment to all that were with him, and all even now that want to continue in following or serving him, that they must hate all relationships of this world. Once again, we must grow from just knowing to truly understanding what the scripture is conveying to us. The word hate in the Greek that is used in this passage actually means of relative preference for one thing over another, by way of expressing either aversion from or disregard for the claims of one person or thing relative to those of another. Now, with this understanding of the word hate, Yeshua is saying to anyone considering or counting the cost that they cannot prefer any relationship over their relationship with him. Yeshua emphatically states that anyone that prefers any relationship above their relationship with him, they cannot be his disciple. Yeshua doubles down in the very next verse, so that there is no confusion or ambiguity of what is expected of anyone considering counting the cost of following or serving him. The Gospel of Luke chapter 12 verse 27. And whosoever doth not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Understand that this means anyone that does not adhere without exception cannot serve Yahweh Elohim. Remember, we examined earlier that serving means no one can pick and choose what commandments, statutes, laws, ordinances, and or instructions to adhere to, nor when they decide to adhere. The Gospel of Luke chapter 12 verse 28. For which of you, intending to build a tower, sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he hath sufficient to finish it? Here, Yeshua is asking the multitude that was with him, which of them did not count the cost before embarking upon a build? Remember, even the secular definition we gave from the Collins English Dictionary called out the importance of counting the cost before taking action. The Gospel of Luke chapter 14 verse 29. Lest haply, after he hath laid the foundation and is not able to finish it, all that behold it begin to mock him. The Gospel of Luke chapter 14 verse 30. Saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. These last verses are the consequences of having not counted the costs, which highlights our initial question. How many of us were asked to consider counting the cost before we made a commitment to serve? Regrettably, counting the cost of serving Yahweh Elohim is not a commonplace issue that converts or even long-term believers, for that matter, are asked to consider. Sadly, this seems to resemble many that make up the church today, that profess with their mouths to be servants of Yahweh Elohim, but practice and adhere to the things of the prince of this world, Hasatan. Because of their hypocrisy, the world mocks them and the church as being hypocrites. In the Gospel of Luke chapter 14 verses 31 through 32, Yeshua gives another example to the multitude that was with him of counting the cost before making a decision. The Gospel of Luke chapter 14 verse 31. Or what king, going to make war against another king, sitteth not down first, and consulteth whether he be able with 10,000 to meet him that cometh against him with 20,000? The Gospel of Luke chapter 14 verse 32. Or else, while the other is yet a great way off, he sendeth an ambassage and desireth conditions of peace. Yeshua and the scriptures support and require consideration or counting the cost. The Gospel of Luke chapter 14 verse 33. So likewise, whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. The Gospel of Luke chapter 14 verse 34. Salt is good, but if the salt have lost his savor, wherewith shall it be seasoned? The Gospel of Luke chapter 14 verse 35. It is neither fit for the land, nor yet for the dunghill, but men cast it out. He that hath ears to hear, let him hear. The Messiah ends the Gospel of Luke chapter 14 by reiterating his original commandment given in the Gospel of Luke chapter 14 verse 26, that anyone that has any other thing or relationship above him cannot be his disciple. Then shares of the consequences of not adhering to Yahweh Elohim's commandment by way of a parable. What we should take away from the parable is to consider, count the cost of what you have. At the same time, understanding to reverence and serve the one responsible for what you have. For he is the one that gives and takes away. And those that do not understand this are not worth anything and are just cast out. This passage of scripture should be a strong warning to all with discernment and the desire to be a disciple of Yeshua, to count the cost of adhering or not adhering to Yahweh Elohim's commandments. Let all of us today heed Yeshua's warning to count the cost, to consider serving Yahweh Elohim. That we have come to understand that everyone must choose to do or not to do. The choice of to do starts with first and foremost growing from just knowing to truly understanding Yahweh Elohim's commandments, statutes, laws, ordinances, and instructions, and then to follow them without exception. The alternative choice to not do, we have been warned, condemns you to consequences that come along with that decision. Something to think about. As we have shared before and want to continue to emphasize, a person can only be as obedient or serving as to what they know to be true. Let us allow Scripture to validate this. 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 15 reads, "Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth." So, let us not just study, but study to show ourselves approved unto God Elohim, rightly dividing the word of truth. We must first understand Yahweh Elohim's true commandments, statutes, laws, ordinances, and instructions before we can begin serving Him. We came to understand this, that you cannot truly serve Yahweh Elohim without knowing His word. Sadly, this is the state of many believers and many churches today, that they want to serve Yahweh Elohim by doing what they believe to be right. Yeshua made it plain and He made it clear in the Gospel of Luke chapter 14 verses 26 through 27 and verse 33 that Yahweh Elohim has already established what He is desiring of His disciples. So in counting the cost, let us understand that we first need to learn to rightly divide the word of truth. Let us be obedient to Yahweh Elohim that we might serve Him in spirit and in truth. In closing, my prayer is that this episode of Something to Think About has assisted us in continuing to grow and move from just knowing to truly understanding the word of the Most High, Yahweh Elohim. Peace and blessings.
His servant encourages you and prays that you will continue with him on the journey of growing and moving from just knowing to understanding the word of the Most High, Yahweh Elohim. To support you on your journey, his servant offers the following resources. His servant email address. Please feel free to reach out to his servant at any time with any questions, concerns, suggestions, and/or comments. His servant website and his servant YouTube channel. You are encouraged to subscribe to be alerted of new content. In addition, his servant recommends reading or listening to the beginning of Scriptural Truth, Volume 1. It affords a strong beginning foundation in not just knowing, but understanding the Scripture.